And now we would like to invite Emmy van Deurzen for her speech.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes. Well, that was a wonderful speech by Gidon, wasn't it? He really did us proud. He reminded us what existential therapy is about. It is about us looking deeply into what it means to be human and to rise above all these conflicts that will always be part of being human, but somehow find the better nature in ourselves to create a better civilization, a better world together. And that is the challenge today and tomorrow of this conference. And we are indeed very fortunate to be here together and to be able to be here in person rather than online. Let me see. There we go. So that's me. You don't need to hear about that too much. That's the new School of Psychotherapy and Counseling that Claire is the principal of. That's the Existential Academy in London, where we do a lot of work as well. But this is the one I wanted to mention to you, which is the existential movement. And our motto is bringing wisdom to the world. It is about taking the existential ideas and our experience as therapists and bring it to a wider public. Exactly what Gidon was talking about. These are my books. You don't need to hear about that. This I want you to know about. It's my new book, The Art of Existential Freedom, which is very much aligned with the idea of the existential movement. And that's the book Claire and I are just about to finish, and we'll do a workshop about it tomorrow afternoon in one of the workshop rooms if you're interested. But back to building bridges. My talk is called Conflicts That Unite Us. Why? Because we all share in common the fact that being human is to experience conflicts. We know these conflicts very well, you know. We are finite. We have gravity, entropy, death, labor, illness, failure, loss, fragility, chance, disaster, and war. All these things happen in our lives. All these things are realities. Jean-Luc Nancy, in his book, The Fragile Skin, said it so nicely. He took the idea of Jaspers, that human beings are always faced with limit situations, and he reframed that as liminal spaces in which we are transformed. They are our frontiers, and we need to use them as frontiers to go beyond into new territory. And I believe that we stand at such a frontier in our world today, and that's why we see what is happening in the world. Dan Dennett, a very well-known philosopher who has died recently, made an interesting contribution from his very different philosophical perspective. And he spoke about how conflicts between people are actually part of our process of evolution, because that's how dialectics work. When we stand opposite each other, we bring something out in each other, something that is called reflection and self-questioning and wondering whether perhaps our perspective is a little too narrow, and whether if we open our minds up to the other's point of view, we might discover something worth knowing that makes us go beyond our horizon into a new area where we are able to get through building bridges. And Dan was very good at reminding us of how we should be when we are in dialogue or in debate with each other. We should attempt, like a psychotherapist, to put ourselves in the mind of the other rather than fighting them, and listen really carefully to what they see in the world, even if we disapprove of it and disagree with it. And as we do that, our opponent should think, I wish I'd thought of putting my own thoughts in that way, because we are clarifying where they stand before we come with our own perspective. I wish I could always do that. I can't, but it's a good reminder. So in this way, we can come to greater agreements. Of course, here are the 10 commandments of logic that I like to teach my students about. These are the philosophical rules for making sure that we proceed through conflicts in a decent and a respectful way. And I won't go through them because I'm sure you're familiar with them, or you can take a picture of them and remind yourself later. But, you know, it starts with no ad hominem attacks. We never try to shoot down the messenger. We listen to the message and we try to see what truth might come out of that. So no generalizations, no proofs from assumptions, no non sequiturs, no bandwagons, lots of really interesting rules that keep us on the straight and narrow, and that are vital when you are involved in meditation work. So Dan said, the task of a mind is to produce a future. The task of our minds is to think so clearly about the problems and the conflicts that out of that we produce something new, something worth having. Basically, the mind is an anticipator, and it takes things from the past and turns them into anticipations of the future. And so our minds put together are an immense facility for us to do better with our world, better with our civilization. And that is very much what we should be doing. The work by Malgorzata Martinoga and Martina Silenzak on the different sorts of conflicts is also extremely helpful in this process. Because again, it is clear that whenever human beings have conflicts, they have conflicts for the same reasons, whether those are conflicts in a couple, in a family, in a group, in an institution, in a nation, or between nations. It's always the same things. The conflicts are either caused by data conflicts, because really there is a lack of information. So always go to information. By conflicts of interest, perceived competition, an unwillingness to consider how the available territory can be most fairly divided or used together. Structural conflicts caused by destructive patterns of behavior from the past. relationship conflicts, which come from emotions, misperceptions, stereotypes. We all recognize these things and we all do these things. So this is the important lesson, isn't it? It's not they that do it, it's us that do it. All of us do these things every day of our lives. And of course, the very important category of value conflicts. When we start with different ideologies, different worldviews, and we're not quite sure how to relate to people who come from that different perspective. Well, dialectically speaking, again, that is a challenge, isn't it? That allows you to see the world from a slightly different angle. And so these two put together force you, absolutely oblige you to come up with a bigger worldview that can encompass both those previous worldviews, because that's how dialectics work. It's not either or, and it's not compromise. No, it's about creating a bigger tent. It is always about creating a bigger perspective, right? It's not about compromise. So the conflict spiral, I'm sure many of you will be familiar with that. It's a must when you work with groups. So Claire Graves died in 1986, but still totally relevant. The observation that it's good when you start with cooperation, but what happens is that people start to compete, then they start assuming other people are taking deliberate actions against them, so they get defensive, so they look for support against the other, they start attributing motives to each other, they rely on their assumptions rather than checking the facts. Groupthink falls into place where whole groups of people start to function with the same negative assumptions about each other. And then the beliefs feed observations. We start to see proofs for our assumptions and slag other people off more. We become moralistic. We take the moral high ground, think the others are worse than we are. We personalize it and stereotype people. And then it becomes a game of hurting the other before you get hurt yourself. Once you're into that game, you got a war. Because now on both sides, people are trying to gain an advantage, telling themselves that if they didn't do that, they would get destroyed. That's how human beings go down into mutual self-destruction, together into the abyss. No, not good enough. How do we let this happen when we know so much stuff about it? Why? So this is the opposite. This is the same theory based on Graves with the same 8 stages, but building it up towards holistic awareness. So it's about starting with the archaic instincts and learning to build a kind of security for yourself and using the facts and scientific observations, be sensitive to the need for equality and harmony and community, and applying all those rules of community, listening to each other, and coming to an integrative energy which allows us to work together towards a holistic awareness of what is true for all of us. And as we know, we are up against climate change, climate crisis rather, and we cannot afford to mess around. We've got to work together. We've got to stand together. Look at this picture by Hieronymus Bosch, around 1500, 500 years ago. He painted the 7 deadly sins and the 4 last things. And you know those 7 deadly sins. they still are what get us down. Nothing has changed. It's wrath, envy, greed, gluttony, sloth, lust, and pride. Because he believed that, death and judgment and heaven and hell were the corners holding it all together. We have grown further beyond these views of the world, but we do still need to reckon with these human abilities, these human tendencies to fall down on the job and to avoid difficulties and to not challenge ourselves and to not look in our own hearts first before we accuse the other. So a very less quoted existential philosopher that people ought to read much, much more in this day and age is Nicholas Berdyaev. His book, The Destiny of Men, where he spoke about this demonical element in man. And he attached that to the idea that in us there is a fathomless abyss of freedom. It is this nothingness. It is this fact that we are not just mechanisms being told how to act and how to be, but we are these free individuals with all our complex emotions, desires, needs, longings, and all of our fears that create for these troubles. So he saw fanaticism as one of the most dangerous things about that. And I think he was absolutely spot on. And he believed that what we need is a love of truth and ontological veracity. And it means that we have to be prepared to strive to be truly human, which is to be capable of actually doing right by humanity. Now, the situation is pretty bleak. This was this month's Psychiatric Times with a headline of record high suicide rates in the USA. And it's not just in the USA either. It's a very sad situation. Globally, an estimated 5% of adults suffer from depression, says the World Health Organization. 1 in every 8 people in the world live with what we call a mental disorder. The number of antidepressants prescribed per year has more than tripled over the past 2 decades, from 18.4 million in 1998 to 70 million in 2018 in the UK alone. Now, this should really concern us, because what we're actually seeing is an epidemic of drug addiction, but a drug addiction that is on prescription. What on earth is going on there? Why do we go back to these medieval thoughts that all these people are ill? No, these people are unhappy. These people have not found their way in the world. These people have not found a way to actualize what they're capable of being. We can do better than this, a great deal better. Do we really need 60,000 deaths by suicide in the EU alone? It just makes me want to sob when I see that. I can't believe it. Anxiety, worse. So 40 million Americans affected by it, 8 million in the UK, 12% of the European population at any one time goes to the doctor complaining of anxiety. Let's think about this for a moment. There is a real problem in our world, and the wars are the outcome of it. But this is the start of it. It is the inability of human beings to use their amazing brains and their amazing beings to work things out together in such a way that we become creative about what we do, supportive about what we do, in unison about what we do. Instead, what we've got is a society that is run by artificial things and by negativity. The medical world is not going to sort this out. This is an example of advanced medical view of depression. So if you look at it, the way they see that is that all these parts of the circle are the wonderful research that is being done on various potential physical underlying causes of depression. And then they, very advanced way, have this one little box that says it's about stress and traumatic events. But really, that is a small thing. When we know it is much, much more complicated than that. Yes, of course, there are lots of things that happen in the brain, but they happen in the brain because of what happens in a person's life. And when the person's life changes for the better, then the brain will follow. It then does not need the medication. So why are people so unhappy? Why is the planet so unhappy? Because we've been on the wrong path. Open your eyes. We've been on the wrong path. We've just exploited the planet. We are exploiting each other too. We're exploiting and undermining our own lives. Did you know that 1 million of the world's estimated 8 million species of plants and animals are threatened with extinction? That's terrifying. We've done that. We're just destroying stuff the whole time. And not just stuff, the essential things that support us. 75% of the Earth's land surface has been altered. The oceans, 16.6%. Close to 90% of the marine fish stocks are overexploited or depleted. I mean, these figures are staggering. But did you know them? I didn't until I went and researched it. You don't hear about it. So is it really surprising that in the midst of all that, there is so much human unhappiness too? Human beings are part of nature. Human beings are hurt by the way we live every bit as much as the fish in the sea and the animals on the planet. It implicates all of us. And when we see man-made wars around us and the destruction and the misery they create, it's just terrifying. Don't you feel that way when you watch on your television screen and you think, that could be in my town tomorrow if things go even more wrong? Is that the way to go? Of course not. That is absolutely not the way to go. The suffering in Ukraine and in the Middle East remind us of the fragility of human life. And it shows us how easy it is to take liberties with that and to become elementary destructive about it and to forget what we are capable of and to turn ourselves into something less than human. So how are we going to change it? How are we going to build these bridges, make these connections, and find this collaboration? How can we bridge between people who are fighting? How can we engage ourselves and each other with this creation of a shared meaning and purpose in the world? Well, as you know, we need clarity of thought. We need to not let ourselves be taken over by the world and just say, oh, that's just how it is, or that's just how they have made it. That's us. That's us. So I would say, not in my name. I can do better than that. And if I can use some of my insights and energy to try and spread that word, I will. And I'm pretty sure that most of you in this room feel exactly the same way. And it's going to need a lot of people of clear mind and goodwill to change that around. But we can do that. I suggest you all look up the Robert Waldinger study, the famous Harvard study, which too few people know about, which is a study on adult development. It followed up a whole generation of college students and their spouses and now their children over 80 years to find out how they conducted their lives and what choices they made and how their lives changed according to the choices they made. And I'm just going to sum up 80 years of studies in a few words here, but please go look it up, get the book, watch Robert Waldinger on his TED Talk, because it's really wonderful to watch. What they found is that material possessions made no difference. The ones that got rich were often less happy and less content at the end of their life than the ones that remained poor. That was very, very clear indeed. The one thing that stood out is that the ones that isolated themselves and that became sort of paranoid about the world and felt the world was therefore an unsafe place to live in, they were killed by their loneliness. The people who were well connected up to their communities in whatever ways, even if they lived alone, if they worked for their community and they met with neighbors and things like that, they were fine. It is the connectivity that human beings need. When we connect to each other and we work together on something rather than against each other, that makes for thriving human beings who feel that their lives are good. And it is never easy to achieve that because there are so many things we have to learn. We have to learn to survive. And you know, that's what kids do. They learn to survive for the first 15 years of their lives and maybe first 20 years of their lives. You have to find a way to make yourself welcome in the world, acceptable by other people. And you have to find a way to be open to welcoming other people into the world. These are huge tasks. It's not easy to do. All too often it goes wrong and people end up isolating themselves or choosing subgroups and fighting against other people. You also have to learn to respect and love yourself so that you can respect and love other people too. And you have to learn to remove yourself from the crowd and the noise and reflect on your experiences so that you remain in touch with your values and the things that matter. And you understand why you're feeling the way you're doing, and you know how you can move forward again. You have to learn to become resilient and transform. And then we discover that ourself is not a thing. It's not even just a process, as we like to say in the existential community. It's actually a matrix. The self is a matrix within which lots of things happen. And as they happen, that self changes shape. And the same is true for a couple. The mood of the couple changes according to what happens and how it processes things. And the same is true in a society. According to the values and the meanings we create together and what we attach to and what we busy ourselves with, that matrix changes. And so these things unfold slowly. We evolve slowly, and meaning emerges from what we do slowly. And that allows us to reflect on it and to steer that process in the right direction. But who is doing that? Nobody is. The world is being directed by vested interest of finance. The world is directed by politicians who try to get power and influence. It is not led by wise people. That's weird. If as human beings we know that it is possible to create better matrices, why are we not doing it? Why are we allowing ourselves to be dragged into wars and terrible economic situations and social situations? We need to learn to use our existential dialogue in many different ways. A constructive dialogue, as in therapy, beyond blame and shame. There are many examples of it. Social phenomenology that R.D. Laing spoke about, the Socratic dialogue, mediation, and Kirk Schneider's experiential democratic dialogue. We don't label people. We don't attach shame to them. We look at the ontodynamics and we try to liberate the situation so that new connections can be created. And of course, vitally, we work with paradox, shadows, and dialectics, rather than having some weird idealistic idea of a kind of ideal harmony that has to be achieved, because that we know is never going to happen. It's always going to be dynamic. It's always going to be evolving. And there always will be these conflicts. So this is how you get through the conflicts in a nutshell. It starts with hostility and name calling, which is sort of sniping across the water without a bridge. From there, when you learn to use these principles of understanding, you will learn to build arguments for your own view. And then there needs to be discipline about listening to each other's arguments. So then we can have a debate about the differences. And from there, we can move to the level of having a dialogue about the essentials and the universals that we share. So what are the things that cannot be compromised on, that are essential? And then we can come to dialectical collaboration. So we move up in levels of engagement, where in this world we often find that the only thing people are capable of when they think they're getting to be genuine is that they express their emotions. But that's only very much the surface level, isn't it? So you express your anger, but then you need to ask yourself, you need to be facilitated, you need to be helped to understand what brings that anger out. In other words, what is being threatened? And beyond that, what is the value that is being threatened, that is so important to you? And then we can find out the facts. Is it really being threatened? Are there other ways in which it can be preserved? Can we have an understanding by contemplation of what actually the new situation might be, what new possibilities there might be, so that we can face the limitations, face the reality, but also see the possibilities in the future. What is my capacity? What is possible in the world? What is realistic? And then we can shift it a level to the dialectics. And then we can start putting the pieces of the puzzle together, getting this wonderful feeling of connectivity that we all crave. And why do we crave it? That's what we are. Our brains are made that way. Our brains do all this connecting inside of themselves. All the neurons connect all the time. We only feel good when those neurons are connecting and we're learning something new. Learning feels good. Learning feels like our framework of meaning is expanding. And as our framework of meaning expands, we feel better. So we need to keep weaving things together instead of severing things. We need to realize that when people feel severed in their connections, they experience that inside of their brain too. They feel attacked in their integrity. And that is why they are prepared to fight, because they think it's a matter of survival. But we know that the brain is actually incredibly malleable and it evolves the whole time. So let's use that knowledge and let's create a world in which we can adapt to each other and learn from each other, connect with each other, and sometimes disconnect from certain ideas or processes that are not good for us too. New learning also means undoing bad connections. It means rewiring ourselves, creating and recreating who we are, and also facing the emptiness we often feel inside and listening to that emptiness and asking ourselves how we want to fill that empty space in ourselves. And being aware that when people are disenfranchised and lost, they are not going to be in a good place to build bridges. They have to be made safe first. They have to find places to stand above the destruction, as Guidon was doing in his talk, thinking about rising above the conflicts and looking at our shared humanity again and supporting each other, not getting fooled by the mistakes of our politicians into believing that we are each other's enemies, because we are not. We're just all human beings sharing one planet. And when bridges are destroyed, we build new ones. That's what happened in Brighton. That Brighton Bridge broke and we built a new one. We come out of our safety and connect to bridge the space between us. And that space may seem unovercomable. But you know, we're very good at building bridges. So if we can do it in the physical world, we are able to do it in the emotional, psychological, spiritual world as well. Let's look at the forests and the way they are all connected underneath the ground, you know, the mycelium, the rhizomes, the biospheres. It's pretty amazing. And that gives you a perspective on how nature intended us to connect. Look at your brain, look at the rhizome, and remember what in principle we are capable of doing. Ronnie Lang used to say that psychotherapeutic relationship was a form of research, a search constantly reasserted and reconstituted for what we have all lost. And that, I think, in a nutshell, is what was his genius. To know that when a person is struggling with emotional problems, they are really struggling with having lost their grasp of what is possible for a human being. And in that loss, they represent each and every one of us. Their pain is our pain, and the pain of any person in the world is relevant to each of us. Nietzsche said, I couldn't not quote Nietzsche when he had such a beautiful thing to say about it. Man is something that shall be overcome. Man is a rope tied between beast and overman, a rope over an abyss. What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not an end. Now that is very, very interesting. So you start by throwing your rope of your existence across an abyss as best you can. And you see how humanity as a whole is a bridge builder, a connector, like Dan Dennett was saying. Our brains are made that way. This is what we can do. I found this wonderful Turkish bridge. When I researched Turkish bridges, I was amazed. You Turks are fantastic bridge builders. This bridge is 1,100 years old and it's still standing. When you build a good bridge, it will last. So it is well worth building them, but you have to build them strong. Now, a little excursion into the 1990s, when Digby and I were co-directors of the Center for the Study of Conflict and Reconciliation at the University of Sheffield. And as part of that, we went with the European Association for Psychotherapy to the Council of Europe to make sure the EAP could become an NGO of the European Union and of the Council of Europe, because of this same idea that psychotherapists were needed to change the world for the better. But also, we were involved obliquely on the side with this amazing Northern Ireland peace process. You know, there had been 30 years of troubles, as the Irish called it. But troubles is not a good word for it. It was murder and mayhem. And when you lived in London, as I did at the time, it affected you very closely too, because there were many bomb attacks in London. And eventually Tony Blair and Bertie Ahern agreed that it had to be tackled. But the guy in the middle is the most important person to remember, because that's George Mitchell, an American deputy who spent years of his life sorting this out. And I happen to know how he did it, because we worked with a colleague of his at the Center for the Study of Conflict and Reconciliation, and we heard all the stories of what was happening. So George said what he did is that he listened. He listened. He listened. And he listened. And he listened. And he listened. And he listened some more. He listened for 2 bloody years. And he never tried to convince one party or the other. He listened. And people felt listened to. He was funny about it. He said, many of them talked very fast, some in accents I wasn't familiar with. I can well imagine. To improve my understanding, I held many, many informal meetings in my office and theirs, where I said little and listened as much as possible. Now, we happen to know a thing or two about how to listen. Listening, really listening to someone is hard, especially when it goes on for years. And that is what it takes. That is all it takes. When people feel listened to, they become freed up to listen to. And when people start to listen, really listen to each other, there is only one way forward. They connect. That's what happens. That's what I have found year on year when I worked with couples. Always, even the most boring of that, if you just persist month after month in stopping them fighting and making them listen to each other, teaching them listening skills, active listening skills. That's all you do. That couple starts listening to each other and they start understanding and connecting again. So George Mitchell said, it's a sign of respect. And that's the other thing. When people feel respected and heard, the situation changes. Now, this was our mole in the discussions. This is our colleague, now Lord John Alderdice, who worked with us at the center. And he was involved with George Mitchell in his capacity as psychoanalytic psychotherapist to help him listen. And he told us many interesting stories about what happened, but the most poignant one is that when George Mitchell put people around the table after he had listened to all of them for many, many months, and they sat there in the same room glaring at each other, he said, now, let's not play silly buggers about this. Let's not try to be stronger or more heroic or superior to each other, because all of us are the victims here. All of us will get shot down by the people we represent. None of us will get the outcome that they expect us to get. All of you will go home and you will be pointed at and you will be told you haven't done a good enough job. We are in the same boat. We got a country that is on fire, and it's up to us to make sure we handle the future in a better way, and we won't leave here until we've done that. And that was it. They just stopped them. They stopped them arguing. They taught them to listen to each other. And they took the dialectical principle. It wasn't you're going to win or I'm going to win. It was we're all going to lose. But let's see how we can lose together in a way that makes the future possible for all of us. And that worked. And I think that is a story worth knowing about. Nobody knows about this stuff, but that is a very important moment in history where a violent war was ended, and that still holds today. So George Mitchell says, the secret of it is we all want peace. At the end of the day, no human being is as stupid as to want to live in a state of war. So we all need to learn to cooperate. We need to be democratic and peaceful about it. We need to make sure that everyone gets heard. We need to be patient. We need to be persistent. We need to overcome lack of trust and restore it. We need to create hope and opportunity. My definition of hope is a commitment I make to the future. It is not something I do passively, sitting there hoping it will be okay. It is me saying, this is important. This is what I would like to commit my energy to. And that makes me hopeful because I know I am opening my heart and my brain to what I am hoping for. I'm opening myself to. That is what hope is. Hope is a thing like love, a thing that we do, not a thing we receive. It's not something magic. It's something you create. No one will win unless we win together. That's what George Mitchell used to say. No one will win unless we win together. And that is true for the whole of humanity. Look at this splendid example of a bridge. That is called the Londonderry's Peace Bridge. And they created it to create a symbolic connection between what were previously warring communities divided by the River Foyle. It stands as a symbol of the city's determination to bring the people together. I think that is absolutely wonderful. And I think we can do that. It's been proven we can do that. So why are we not doing it more? Because people just don't realize how to do it. And they go about it in the wrong way. So people all over the world feel that, there's no point in trying because this is how the world works. All my clients trouble with these things. They think exploitation is how the world works. It's never fair. People are in for the profit and the productivity. They're not interested in creativity. It's all about consumption, not about generosity. It's about achievements over long-term viability, short-term results rather than long-term consequences, freedoms over responsibilities, rights over duties and obligations, competition over collaboration, fame and fortune over right living in the community, excitement and youthful things over mature reflection and understanding, inequality and oppression over fairness and justice. Speak to any young people and you will find that they are already cynical about the world and they perceive it to have these values. Those are deficient values we live with. Why do we accept a world like that? It's very easy to achieve global human well-being. There are certain things you'd have to do. You'd have to put your minds together to achieve. You'd have to start by creating a healthy planet, and that can be done. You have to have a non-proliferation of fossil fuels and create safe public transport everywhere. You'd have to have small-scale, ecologically based communities where people can grow their own food and live in unity with orchards and allotments and healthcare and childcare and education for all, but in small communities, safe. You have to have a global secular morality, which everybody can agree with. You have to eliminate extreme wealth by tax and extreme poverty by minimum income. global disarmament and dialectical therapeutic governance through citizens' assemblies. It can be done. We know how to do it, but we're not doing it. We need a new vision, which is what we are working at. So I need to be careful about the time, so I'm going to shift through some of this. What we need to do, though, is to inspire individual people. As psychotherapists, we know that it all starts with showing people how they can take charge of their lives again, how they can stop feeling ground down by their depression and their anxiety, and how they can lift themselves up by learning to be what they have been born to be, rather than to become lost in some kind of dark place where their brain isn't working anymore, where their body is not working properly, and they just keep falling ill. To enable a person to find their inner authority over their existential anxiety and to meet it, to trust it, and to trust that our anxiety is a natural part of being human rather than an illness, is the energy we need in order to be fully alive and to flourish. That is the start. So I wanted to give you another example, which is that of Antoine Léris. I don't know if that means anything to you, but he is a guy who lost his wife in the Bataclan IS terrorist attack in 2015. He lost his wife and they had a small child. And the day after he lost her, he wrote to the newspaper, and it was so amazing because he showed how it's done, how you keep your eyes on the purpose. And for him, the purpose was to raise their child. He said, on Friday night, you stole away the life of an exceptional being, the love of my life, the mother of my son. But you will not have my hatred. If the God for whom you kill so blindly made us in his image, each bullet in my wife's body would have been a wound in his heart. Therefore, I will not give you the gift of hating you. You have obviously sought it, but responding to hatred with anger and more hatred would be to give in to the same ignorance that has made you what you are. You want me to be afraid, to cast a mistrustful eye on my fellow citizens, to sacrifice my freedom for security. You lost. And he goes on to say that he's going to look after his son. And every day of the son's life, this little boy will insult you with his happiness and freedom because you don't have his hatred either. And why won't they have his hatred? Because he decided to focus on the way in which we need to create a world together and build bridges with each other instead of shooting at each other across the water. And that purpose of finding a way to listening, and to work together, that is the purpose that all of us in this room know so well how to work towards. So Up to you. What are we going to do with that? I think it's very clear. We need to spread the word, and we need to get out of the shadows, and we need to speak up about what we know is essential for the future of humanity. Thank you very much. Come here, Jack. Jack, you can take this.
Yes. Let's see.
That's
Okay.
better.
Thank you, Emmy, for this very moving talk. I know we are running behind our program, so if you would like to take a break, please feel free to do that. But in the meanwhile, we wouldn't like to deprive you of asking any questions you have to Emmy, since we have her already here, have you here. So well, I think we have space for 2 questions.
Okay.
So
I'm completely lost in time, so.
you were right on time. We were a bit, yeah. So any questions to Emmy?
Thank you so much. Beautiful presentation. In one of the slides, you said that we all want peace.
Excuse me, could you stand up so that people can see you and tell us who you are?
My name is Ammar Sharani. I'm new into existential psychology. So the question that one of the slides that you had, you said that we all want peace. But the reality in the world that not everybody wants peace. You know, there are lots of people who are benefiting from war, from conflicts, and so on. So how do you deal with those people, with this side of the people that actually very high on vengeance, that they're looking for that kind of disruption?
Yes.
Thank you.
You mean people who are in the warfare industry and who are earning more money when they sell more weapons and people like that?
Yes, and also like according to Professor forgot Rees, you know, Professor Rees. Yeah, he is like the desire of vengeance is 20% of people actually high on vengeance, 20% are on peacemaking, and 60% in between. So there are like people who are really into vengeance and war and this, and these will be always disruptors. So how do you work around them, or how do you work with them to bring peace around the world?
It's like this in the whole of humanity. If you intervene in an organization where there is a dispute, it's the same thing. There are some people in the organization who just want to create trouble or who just want to fight. And often that is because they perceive a fight as an opportunity for them to shift the landscape and get into power. So it is the very way in which the world is organized that creates these kinds of disputes. But it is also true that when people perceive an opportunity to have their interests met in a peaceful way, they will always choose that, maybe accepting the people who are making their living out of creating war and havoc. That's possible. I have never worked with people like that on trying to get them to change their mind, so I can't speak up for that. But I do know that if you work with a large group of people and you take those who are most angry and you do exactly what George Mitchell did, which is you listen to them and you figure out why they are so angry, and you help them see a pathway towards solutions that doesn't involve sniping and warfare. They will take it. And it is a fact that human beings do desire to live in a place and in a world where their families can thrive. Even the people who make war only do so because they feel that they can be exempted from having that apply to themselves. But when it starts to apply to them, it changes them. On the airplane over the day before yesterday, I watched this amazing movie, Napoleon. And that made it so very, very clear. I'd always kind of thought, oh, Napoleon, yeah, like Hitler, you know, Napoleon, Hitler, these bad people who just go and kill tens of thousands of people. And I made myself watch it, the whole 2.5 hours of it. And, you know, I got some perspective on it. I got the feeling about how empty he was and how needy he was of his relationship, and how he was willing to sacrifice that, and how when he saw he couldn't win anymore, he was faced with exact same conflicts and same difficulties in himself, seeing that it had all been the wrong way round somehow. Now, I have no historical proof that that is what Napoleon felt when he was banned to Elba for the second time. But I think it's quite likely, because I have worked with quite a number of people who were in high places, and I have seen them failing, and I have helped them through their failures, and I have seen the relief in them to give up on the war game and to live in a more peaceful way. So I do believe that that is what we crave at the end of the day. But I agree with you that we are up against some people liking or thinking they like to go for violence and destruction instead. And so we have to find a way to work with that. As did our friend George, you know, in Northern Ireland. He was confronted with people who were killing each other, and he did it somehow. If he could do it, I think we can do it in other situations also.
Thank you. Even though I know I promised you 2 questions, I think this was one big, very impactful question and a very important question.
Okay.
So we need to stop for now. Thank you so much, Emmy. That was, thank you.